going to get into the panel discussion. So hopefully everyone has made it back.
Okay, so per the agenda, I'm going to speak a bit about our work on source water protection, and then we are going to turn it over to transition directly into a panel discussion. So before I start talking about source water protection, and also as a way to get everyone back into the room, I'm going to encourage everybody to continue to add your questions to the Q&A section that's adjacent to the chat in the box there. Upvote those that you think are particularly interesting, and we'll tackle some of them with our panelists. I know the last time we sat down and had a webinar, we had a short amount of time for a panel, and I really felt like we could have talked about a lot more. So this is our opportunity to continue that conversation as well. So go ahead and add those questions in there. I can see that there's some really good questions in there already, and then we'll get to them. But before we get there, I'm briefly going to give an update on source water protection. So source water protection, what is that? Okay, it's simply the idea that it's often smarter and cheaper to be proactive and prevent problems upstream rather than to treat them later. So that it's the first layer of proactive risk management that helps ensure Calgarians continue to receive reliable, safe drinking water. It's also good long-term asset management, protects source water and reduces risks to supply, and helps avoid overly costly treatment upgrades down the line. So water quality variability is a natural part of the river system. However, as water quality degrades and becomes more variable, it becomes more challenging and costly to treat. So put simply, high quality, predictable source water helps us avoid pushing the system into more complex or more expensive treatment responses. Water quality is influenced by the condition of land that collects and drains water upstream to our drinking water facilities. So therefore, stormwater is a critical component of source water management. Our policy on the left there is to integrate the protection of cities' drinking water into our planning and development decisions. And so that's the City of Calgary's council policy on stormwater protection that you can see on the left there. And it's also, we've also have in 2018, we completed our first source water protection plan, which outlined the critical actions to reduce risks to water quality degradation. Let's go to the next slide here. So one of the high-risk risks to Calgary source water was identified as a stormwater pollution from current and future land development in the source watershed. So stormwater is typically a very comparatively fairly poor quality and has the potential to degrade Calgary's source water. This is true of both new and older communities, and includes either chronic impacts from ongoing loadings of low concentrations of pollutants or nutrients, or acute impacts, so due to spill events or runoff after severe storms. Management actions for source water quality are first and foremost led by the need to safeguard public health. So that includes pathogens, bacteria, viruses, and protozoa can have an immediate acute impact and therefore are treated as the highest consequence, particularly where human contamination from human sewage from sanitary cross connections or sanitary main breaks is possible. And a cross connection is just when a sanitary pipe accidentally is connected to a stormwater sewer. Nutrients, so for nitrogen, phosphorus, indirectly affect public health and treatment through secondary effects such as cyanobacterial blooms, taste and odor issues, and increased treatment complexity. This reducing chronic nutrient loadings to the Glenmore and Bearspaw reservoirs is critical to avoiding these outcomes. Ideally, we want to avoid any new outfalls in close proximity to our intakes, stormwater outfalls specifically to our intakes into the reservoirs. Where that avoidance is not possible, we have legacy infrastructure to manage, layering complementary control measures across the watershed, and project lifecycle helps deliver comprehensive risk reduction and leverages opportunities to address both chronic pressures and acute events. Stormwater risk management can occur through a wide variety of actions, such as erosion and sediment control, stormwater treatment, spill prevention, avoidance of cross connections or detection and prevention, and nature-based solutions that reduce pollutant generation and mobilization, so source control. This supports functions such as, some supporting functions include monitoring and analysis. Emergency preparedness are also essential. Let's go to the next slide here. A key action identified in the source water protection plan was the creation of drinking water protection zones. So those are that's a source water protection planning tool that's used in many jurisdictions. These zones define those vulnerable areas on the land and in the water around our drinking water intakes and support a risk framework to assess and manage drinking water threats. These are defined as land use activities that may contaminate or degrade drinking water quality under certain conditions or circumstances. So we focus on what is within our municipal authority, and where authority is limited, we use our influence to build partnerships that reduce cumulative watershed risk. We are also advancing source water protection through stormwater servicing, and work is underway to provide clearer guidance on appropriate geographically targeted stormwater management objectives that can be integrated into the Drinking Water Protection Zone project as it is. The zones themselves are not intended to be a barrier to development, but they are going to help us integrate drinking water quality risk considerations into land use plans and development decisions, and will lead to a more consistent, transparent process. Let's go to the next slide. Question we must ask ourselves, therefore, is whose stormwater are we drinking, and who is drinking our stormwater? I think this is an old graphic that has been shared and generated by the ALIDP for several years. It continues to be relevant. Stormwater from urban centers or urban development can often be very poor quality, as I said. Pollutants of concern for water treatment, such as microbiological contaminants and nutrients. The City of Calgary is committed to taking a principled approach to avoid introducing new stormwater discharges near our drinking water intakes. However, in cases where avoidance is not technically or operationally feasible, or legacy infrastructure exists, it's essential that mitigation measures be implemented to minimize risk. So let's talk a little bit let's go to the next slide here. This is my last slide. Let's talk a little bit about some details about contaminants in stormwater. So understanding source water quality is key to ensuring the protection of public health. So the city conducts extensive source water quality sampling at our drinking water treatment facilities and throughout the source watershed. So we keep an eye on this fairly closely. I wanted to highlight some, so what are we talking about here is maybe a question you have, or one that I had, so I'm going to answer it for myself. Some of the contaminants of concern that originate from stormwater, specifically that we're looking into, are total suspended solids, total phosphorus, total nitrogen, chloride, total metals, total organic carbon, pesticides, petroleum hydrocarbons, including polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, PAHs, as well as those bacteria and protozoa. Another thing I want to tell you about before I end this presentation on source water is that we currently are undertaking an emerging contaminants of concern project internal to the City of Calgary. We're we're doing a comprehensive synthesis. I'm running out of words. We're conducting a comprehensive synthesis of the existing monitoring data that I mentioned before that we collect, as well as adding academic research and practices from other jurisdictions. So the project is aiming to evaluate environmental, human health, and source water protection risks at a sub-watershed scale. So specific to our intakes. The key outcome here is going to be a practical tabular contaminant analysis tool. So basically we're making a table, but we're consolidating contaminant occurrence. So the occurrence of some of these contaminants, potential sources, and then investigating guideline benchmarks and relative risk ratings to support informed decision making. And the list of contaminants of concern that I've got on this slide is but the start. It goes off this page probably for 20 more slides that we're taking a look at as part of this report. We're expecting that this work is going to help us further support informed decision making around those emerging contaminants of concern in stormwater, and then what we can do to mitigate those risks before they become a problem. Okay, so that's the end of my presentation on source water at this time. If you have more questions, obviously, about this or anything else that we've talked about this morning, please add them to the Q&A and upvote those that you think are also excellent. I'm going to pass this back to Sophie Warren, my colleague, but who is also a director at the Alberta Low Impact Development Partnership, to plug some of our the upcoming events. And then I'm going to retake the mic to lead us into a panel discussion.
dates with you, but we want to make sure that everyone is very aware of them. So important dates coming up. We do have the ALIDP AGM coming up June 18th. And then, of course, we have our conference happening in November. So, and one of the key dates, too, that's coming up exceptionally quickly is our deadline for presentations and posters. So you can scan this QR code. It'll bring you to a SurveyMonkey where you can put in your proposal for presentation or posters. Again, the deadline for that is April 13th. So coming up pretty quickly here. And I'll get Kyle to go to the next slide. Next slide, Kyle, please. Thank you very much. And then here we're looking for some feedback on what training opportunities you are looking for. So again, we have another QR code here. It'll bring you to a separate SurveyMonkey where you can put in any desires that you have to hear for future training opportunities from the ALIDP. We're always happy to continue working with our members and make sure that we are meeting their needs in terms of training. Okay, and I believe that brings us to our panel discussion.
Just a minute so that we can have that QR code for future training opportunities up just a wee bit longer. As I invite our panelists to turn their cameras and mics on. Oh, I'll turn my camera on as well. Sorry, I didn't realize it was off. I've been smiling at you the whole time and you didn't even know it. Okay. So this, one more plug as I'm inviting the rest of our panelists to turn their mics on and cameras on. We're inviting you to use your cell phone, which is probably within reach, to visit that QR code and give us some ideas about specifically what feedback or what training you feel like would be necessary or useful to you, delivered by the ALIDP and supported by the City of Calgary. What do you want to know about? All right, thank you very much for joining me. I can see that we've got our panelists up here. As a quick hint, if you're still looking at this screen and you would like to look at all of our panelists, on the left-hand side, you can click the View button and then click over to Gallery. That's going to give you an opportunity to see all of our smiling faces, including mine, because I just realized my camera had been off the whole time. Great. Okay, so welcome. So thank you very much, all of you, for joining us again. So to introduce some of us, I've got my colleague Sophie Warren, Mr. Bert Van Duyn, Frank Frigo as well. Thank you. And then Maggie Choi is joining us. And then we've got our co-presenter, Ted Nestor, as well, to answer a few of our questions today. So today I'm going to be really guided to those questions that I can see in the question and answer section. So please continue to add those. And I'm going to start us off with a question that we talked about probably an hour and a half ago about the upcoming bulletin on modeling. I'm going to direct this question towards you, Bert, because I know you spoke a lot about it. The question is about, is the city thinking about revisiting the standard rain gauges? The continuous Calgary rain gauge only has data up to 2014, and for the single event, it's often they've often heard that comments that the 100-year Chicago distribution overestimates the peak of the storm. Bert, do you want to tackle that one?
Oh my, there's actually quite a lot of different items caught up in that, but definitely, yes, we are looking to update our precipitation database. So first of all, the precept database that is being used for continuous simulation, I think we're looking to bring it up to 2022, first of all. There's a fair bit of a review associated with that. Now, as part of that, there is another change that we're making, and that is Environment Canada and Climate Change has issued what are called adjusted or homogenized precipitation databases. And that reflects that historically there have been some in the way how the data was collected, there might have been what is called a certain undercatch, and there are a lot of other factors as well. That was brought to our attention through some peer reviews through the University of Calgary. We had a lot of interaction with Environment Canada and Climate Change on that to understand that, and came to the conclusion, yes, we do need to update our precip database. What that means is, historically, we've seen more precipitation than people always have thought. That information is not available all across the country yet, and in fact, they even haven't updated their climate normals to reflect it either. But it meant an increase overall in the amount of precipitation, specifically in the winter months. And it got us thinking too. Is this like, from a water balance perspective, were we missing certain items? And what we were really missing was the amount of sublimation. And so we've been doing a fair bit of work too, to looking at the sublimation, which to some extent deals with this increase that we're seeing. And so those items are reflected in there. Now, as part of that too, we will need to update at some time our irrigation design estimation tool. That is why we're for now are actually providing irrigation amounts in a database that we want people to use. On that, we will probably also need to update our water balance spreadsheet for the city of Calgary sometime to account for that as well. The other question as to 100-year Chicago distribution, it's amazing as to, so like I've been doing this now for almost 40 years, and this issue of design storms has still not been resolved. I was at the conference 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, we're still talking about a number of these items. In the city of Calgary, we adopted a design storm that we know it's artificial, but it is hitting the peak, both for short duration and for a longer duration as to looking at the volume. And so we have various design storms available. We know short duration is fairly close to Chicago. Longer duration becomes a different story. But rather than asking our consultants to do copious of different runs and then comparing those things, it's just going to be a logistical nightmare in doing that. We came to a what we're calling sufficiently representative storm that is dealing with multiple effects at the same time. You want to talk more about it, feel free to reach out to me separately. This is a topic I can probably talk about for hours and hours and hours, and everybody would run from this.
That sounds like an opportunity for a future training with your ALIDP.
I'm not sure how many people we would get out there.
All right. Well, if you want that, maybe put that in the survey. Mm-hmm.
Prior, I was just going to indicate that, of course, what precip we're using can make significant difference to how we're designing infrastructure, what we see for peak rates and volumes. But of course, this ties to our modeling approaches, and I see there's some other questions on that. So I know Bert could expound more on that, but I think the selection of what we're using for design rainfall and long-term rainfall, super important, but also important how that rainfall is being converted to runoff, how much of it is abstracting, and that really comes down to the modeling parameters that we're suggesting are appropriate for use in our jurisdiction as well. So just wanted to kind of recognize that tie. Rainfall by itself is complex. The modeling adds another level of complexity. The two interact to give you ultimately the conditions that you're ending up designing infrastructure and operations for.
Which we will cover in that industry bulletin that I talked about earlier this morning. Just one aspect too, we're not just looking at current conditions, we're also looking at how does climate change potentially impact as all what we're doing.
Back to you, Briar.
Super. I'm going to propose that we move to a few questions that folks had for the plug and play project. So the first question that I'm reading in the chat here is curious about the audience for the plug and play. So would this apply to smaller infill type multifamily, or intended to be used for larger multifamily as well? Is it intended to change or simplify the application process? Ted, do you want to start with that one?
So I don't think, as far as the plug and play initiative is concerned, I don't think we're basically excluding any multifamily developers. So whether you're smaller or larger, I think anyone is eligible to use the tools and participate in the programs. Although, for the larger developers who tend to be maybe perhaps better resourced, they may not derive as much benefits as, say, the smaller guys who do not have the capacity to undertake perhaps a lot of this work. So I think it's not limited to anybody, but I think the beneficiaries would be the more the mom and pop, the smaller developers focusing on what we call the missing middle type of housing product, who I think would be the biggest beneficiaries of this. And just as an example, like not really the plug and play initiative, but just our on-site stormwater management incentive program. So we've had, I think, somewhere around roughly about 110 applications that have delivered, I think, about 4,000 something housing units. So we've looked at it as part of the evaluation of that program. So the median, so basically a halfway point, we have about the applicants are roughly about 8 units. So, but the average, when you look at everything, is like over 40. So the benefits seem to be flowing from that program, and you probably see that with the plug and play tools as well, to like the smaller guys who aren't necessarily as well resourced to basically do the work. So no restrictions, but I think the beneficiaries are for the smaller guys. And as far as the application process, I don't think it really changes anything. It's still, you have to meet the requirements and whatnot. So I don't think that necessarily changes. So, I mean, it's still basically you got to check off all the boxes with regards to that.
Thank you. I think I've got one more question here about plug and play. I'm directing this to Ted, but anyone else on the panel is welcome to jump in on this as well. Someone is wondering about our challenges to accommodate space for play and low impact development with the pressure from developers to maximize the number of residential units. Does anybody want to tackle that one?
Well, I can start off, and I mean, certainly others can jump in on that. So I think when we were this is actually one of the things that did come up in the discussions that we were having when we were actually scoping out the work on the LID program, that we recognized that there may be some site restrictions, limitations with regards to LID, how much you could, how much you can put on a particular site. And as you mentioned, Briar, just some of the pressures to basically try to get as many units as possible, which maybe has some further limitations as well. So I think as part of the work that we'll be undertaking in terms of the design set 2, I think I've mentioned in the presentation earlier that we look at the benefits, but we look at the constraints, and some of those constraints on these LID practices may be related to how much can you actually put on a particular site. So we'll be taking a look at that. But what we'll be doing is we do have a very high level cost benefit analysis that we will be undertaking. One of the things that we'll be looking at and taking into account that there could be those pressures with regards to developers and how much LID you can put on a property. We are going to do a bit of a high level comparison. So with both LID versus on-site, the conventional detention storage methods. So if we have X amount of dollars to do LID, same amount of money to do on-site storage, we'll try to be factoring all these constraints in on how much you could get realistically on a property, and also seeing how far that gets us in terms of the benefit of LID. So that's just a little bit of some of the things that we've discussed, and some of the things that we intend to maybe pursue as far as the work on the LID Design Set 2 initiative. So yeah, so I'll throw that back out to the other members. I know there's a couple of us who are involved in that project. So if anybody else has anything to add to that, then by all means.
Bert, did you want to take it?
Yeah, I'll take that first. Have to keep in mind, and just go back to that early slide that I showed talking about the whole LID toolbox. The LID toolbox is huge, right? And so what we have seen is when most people think LID, they just think like you need to have an area where water can infiltrate. That's what people think about LID, but the whole LID toolbox is actually significantly greater than that. And even where we're talking about, say, the first phase of the plug and play project, what we're calling water in a box, essentially, there are different approaches in there as to how storage potentially could be provided. It could be rooftop storage, it could be within the landscape, it could be underground. There are various approaches available with that within an overall LID type of realm as well. What we do need to think as a overall professional community is, if you don't do it somewhere for whatever reason, you're going to have to make up for it somewhere else. It's to say, like, it's just like there are no silver bullets in there. And so it is, and this is where the work that Briars was talking about with the TBL analysis, where we really want to look to as to where do we focus our investment, especially in our existing communities and such. But there are no easy outs on that. And as an overall community, we do have to work together on that. I vividly remember over 20-something years ago, we had our first LID conference in Calgary, and somebody came out and said, like, I can make any type of property zero runoff. Strictly speaking, that's correct. We can do that. Now, are we going to do that? No, of course, we're not going to do that. Because it doesn't necessarily make sense. But we're really looking as to what is the appropriate balance for this. I'm just going to call out Maggie and Frank as to if you can maybe add some of your thoughts pertaining to this.
Developers are going to want to maximize the number of units and the developable space on these sites. And in some ways, we want that from a missing middle perspective in terms of a more compact form. So I think looking at a bigger picture, like, it really emphasizes the need for us to ensure that there are high value green spaces in the broader community to serve the purpose of play, and ensuring that we're balancing the overall community needs as well. So I think that's the other layer to it.
Yes, and not much to add to that. I guess I would just also point to the fact that we recognize in inner city communities, we do have stormwater systems that were designed in some cases a century ago. We have a very comprehensive community drainage improvement program. It is also aimed at ensuring that service levels can continue to improve, especially for those communities, again, with infrastructure that was designed 100 years ago without the data, processes and best management practices we have today. So it's a little adjunct to what Maggie and Ted were speaking about, but we recognize our service level components that we need to be addressing for our established communities.
And Brian, I would like to add one thing for people to keep in mind, because like a lot of people are familiar with what Frank was talking about, those community drainage infrastructure projects, which needs to, it's just like you need space to store water, you need however to convey it. And so we can't necessarily all convey it straight to the river, because that has issues associated with it as well. But even if you provide storage within the communities, you somehow need to bring the water from where it is being generated to where it can be stored. In addition, there are the challenges associated with, and especially with the low density residential development, the very scattered nature of the redevelopment associated with that, that we can't necessarily keep up with the community drainage infrastructure type of project. So all of those types of things actually come into play when we're looking at all of this and trying to see what is the appropriate balance for that. Back to you, Briar.
Thank you. I'm going to do one more detention storage tool question, which is maybe simple to answer. What is the platform that we're anticipating to be used for the detention storage tool?
Yeah, the platform, if anyone's interested in what the software that we're using, it's actually been developed as an Excel spreadsheet. So so where we're at right now, it's in draft form, and there's a number of levels of analysis, I think, that are being proposed. So there's something very simple, medium, a little bit more detailed. Level of accuracy will be a little bit different with regards to whatever method that you select. There's a lot of work went behind the development of this tool. There's a lot of things going on in the back with macros and calculations and whatnot. So, but the actual format, the actual software that's been utilized for the development of this tool is an Excel spreadsheet. So, so basically, that's the platform that we're using.
Thanks, Ted. Okay, I'm going to move back to the Q&A. I can see that our topmost voted question. So as a hint, if you have a question and you want it to be upvoted, find your friends and get them to upvote it for you. We're going to move on to road salt and salinity. So we haven't talked about salinity today or in the previous presentation, so let's talk about it now briefly. So the question is what actions the city is considering or taking to addressing increasing salinity relating to road salting, both from reducing the amounts used and on the treatment end within stormwater systems. So I mean, I know that the city of Calgary is currently participating in the province of Alberta's Southern Alberta Chloride Working Group. So there's a lot of people that are currently, a lot of jurisdictions that are currently looking at this. So to address increasing salinity across the region. And the city, we continuously are evaluating our salt management practices because we know of this link. Does anybody else want to add anything specific to, our salinity, our receiving water streams treatment? Who wants to jump in here?
I can jump in very quickly. I was just going to indicate, and I think this is somewhat obvious, but of course it's our smaller receiving streams with the greater proportion of their catchment either in development or in future development. So I think of the Nose Creeks, the West Nose Creeks, Pine Creek, lesser extent Fish Creek, where salinity is perhaps more of an issue. In our larger rivers, Elbow and Bow, the throughput of water and the quality of the incoming water is generally high enough that chloride is not as much of a concern. So certainly there's more of a focus on our small catchments. Add as well that in our region, our jurisdiction, road salting does contribute to an 8-fold reduction in traffic accidents. So very unfortunately, it's one of those things that is very effective, but does have these knock-on watershed effects. And so there's some, and it's also very difficult to treat. It's a dissolved ion, and unless you're looking at RO, it's really difficult to get out of water. You get some uptake in wetlands and other features. You can get some removal and attenuation. through different practices. But I'd say the focus, at least for a lot of the teams we're City of Calgary, is on how we can better manage salt and how we can better manage road pickle overall. So just some adjuncts there. I don't think we have immediate solutions to it. And again, I think part of that bind is that it's very effective at helping improve human life safety outcomes. And there's very definitely a watershed impact, but that is typically constrained more so to our smaller creeks and streams. And one big adjunct when we're talking about Nose Creek and West Nose Creek is that there is a body of work that I think many of you are aware of that is ongoing to build a suite of models that handle the hydrology, the hydraulics, the morphology, and the water quality of Nose Creek in a much more elegant way than they've been handled before, so that we can get better answers on these kinds of questions. So lots of work happening there, but really a tricky and difficult problem to solve.
And Brian, I'm going to add a different angle to all of this. Is while we're definitely looking at, say, what you yourself and Frank talked about, it's also as to, can we tailor our assets to actually deal with the presence of this, and it's not necessarily in the sense that we're going to be able to take it out, because like we're not going to do reverse osmosis or whatever for stormwater, right? But it's like, can you isolate what would be considered sensitive components of your system? And that's something we're talking about as part of the update of our Chapter 6 of our 2011 manual pertaining to ponds and wetlands, because it is important. So where we're even talking about, say, using stormwater for irrigation and such. Can we isolate or create a bypass or something of that nature? It's also, we're considering, say, the guidance for the soil cells as to possibly in certain areas, rather than taking water from the street, taking water from the adjacent properties, which will have a lower salt loading with that. Those are things we're all contemplating and talking about as part of the update of our guidance documentation, LID modules, and such.
Yeah, it's a tricky problem to be sure, but one we're not backing away from. Let's go to, I like this broad one. Oh, thanks, Anonymous. Sorry. Which LID practices appear best suited to Calgary's climate and development patterns? Like, what have, I guess, like, what have we learned? Maybe let's start. I mean, we've learned a lot. In the last presentation that we had, that was recorded if you missed it, we talked a lot about what we have learned and things that we have changed and moving forward. So I'm going to frame this question in terms of what appears best suited going forward, suited to Calgary's climate and development patterns.
May I start with this one, Brian? I think I'm perhaps not the most qualified person. You're a very qualified person to speak about this, because our triple bottom line work that is focused on building a GSI evaluation tool from a triple bottom line standpoint is an important kind of piece of work in this area. But I'd say one of the things that is interesting to contrast with Calgary compared to many other jurisdictions in North America is just the extremity of situations that we have. Our hydrology, we've talked about rainfall earlier. Our hydrology is wildly variable. Like the short-term intensities we see in Calgary are very high, even compared with other jurisdictions that have typically wetter climates. We have deep freeze thaw. We have, periods of drought. We don't have consistent rainfall. All of our rainfall really is, 50% of it occurs between May 15th and July 15th every year on average. We have development patterns that are a little bit different than most of the rest of the country. So I'd say that doing GSI in our jurisdiction is particularly challenging. The cold climate aspects, the very highly variable hydrology, we swing from drought to flood sometimes in a single season. This makes it difficult to, have GSI right-sized. We also have very sensitive receiving streams. So compared to a lot of jurisdictions, and I talked about our smaller streams being even more sensitive, but even our larger receiving streams, the Bow River is a cold water sport fishery, and so very sensitive to things like TSS, to nutrients. So I would say GSI is a even more thorny challenge in our jurisdiction than it is in many, and that is in part why ALIDP and some of the efforts of not only the City of Calgary but in industry to better understand, learn from what we have done in GSI, evolve and take things forward is very, very important. So kind of using this as a plug to say thank you to all of you for the work that you do to keep driving us forward. We don't have everything solved, and I was going to turn it back to you if you don't mind, Briar, just to maybe give us a little more context on the work you've been doing on this GSI TBL tool. It is one of the things that I think is going to help us better understand what's worked, what hasn't worked, and that should lead us to better kind of macro consideration of where GSI fits and in what manner, and certainly on a more micro scale, how we can refine it to give the greatest benefits and the lowest costs, both from an operating capital standpoint for GSI in our region.
I can add a few things, right? The opportunity presented by the TBL tool, which, like I mentioned earlier in the presentation, it applies a cost-benefit analysis methodology to valuing those benefits and co-benefits and economic impacts to implementation of GSI. So one of the things, so I mentioned in the presentation that we're taking a look at the opportunity to compare different options against each other, but I also mentioned that the wider purpose of this is so that we can make better decisions or make good decisions around where GSI makes sense, like where is the best fit or the optimal configuration, incorporating this into gray infrastructure systems as well. And also acknowledging the additional services that GSI provides to us as a city overall to meet a broader number of goals. So it's less about making sure that it goes everywhere and making sure that it goes in the right places for the right purposes and for the right reasons. And really, it's going to be detailed enough for us to be able, well, because you're doing dollars and cents, right? So you have to get details enough to be able to, rather than just like do like is it 5 or is it 4? We're actually applying dollars to these things. So it gives us an opportunity to have the tool evaluate in a specific scenario what kind of benefits could a GSI solution in this case have for, say, for example, some of our targets that are more cumulatively based. So those targets that we manage or those conditions that we manage that are as a result of cumulative effects such as water quality, such as volume. So those are typically assessed on larger scales than, say, for example, instantaneous flooding. And so it gives us an opportunity to make sure that we're placing those mitigation measures for cumulative effects in the right places so that we can also optimize our infrastructure dollars in that way. So it's like I mentioned in the presentation, it's sort of set up to compare two options together, but we're planning on using it for program development and for policy making as well. Does anybody else want to talk about?
Brian, I do want to take this one for a bit as well, because a lot going through my head on this. It is actually a topic I have spoken at in past training courses, and it went through my head. It was like, sounds like we have a training course for November on specifically this topic. I'll start off with, first of all, what not to do. Don't just copy and paste practices in other regions to Calgary and vice versa. I always talk about context, and that's something you really need to be extremely careful with, because you can run into huge problems. As Frank already touched on, you need to consider the variability of what we're seeing, which is often mentioned in the prairies potentially being among the worst in the world and such. Excuse me. And as a stormwater profession, we're not very good at that. We tend to talk largely about, say, averages or means and such, and we're not really good as to looking at variability, uncertainty, and those types of things. Now, when you hear the LID community talk about, say, what should you do, you often hear them talk about mimicking what the original hydrology would have been for an area, which in our case would be an evapotranspirative regime, that type of thing. That doesn't necessarily mean that that is absolutely what we need to do, because it depends too, ultimately, what are your objectives. And so you need to go back as to what are your objectives. And we've got a range of different objectives. It can be flood control. It can be different types of water quality control. It can be hydromodification types of things. You really need to look at it with respect to what your objectives are. And then certain practices as a function of that will come more to the fore than other practices. But even when you're thinking of, say, water quality control, people might think of, okay, in that case, we're just looking at systems that treat the water. Yes, but that is an incomplete answer, because addressing, say, the volume of the runoff is a potential benefit associated with that as well. And so it is not as simple as it sounds. And that's why I said, maybe we do have a course for November on this particular topic.
If I can, Bri, I was just going to add one other quick thought. One of the things we've heard through some of the work that Kyle and others have been involved with, doing work with many of you around our GSI narrative, understanding what our journey has been in terms of learning about GSI, has really highlighted the need for design standards and specifications that make implementation and designs easier and more straightforward. And one of the reasons that has been challenging is exactly what we were just talking about, the fact that in Calgary you have these wild swings in hydrology, you have freeze thaw, you have a plant community that needs to be adapted to all of that. These are just some of the factors that make GSI more challenging. So I think one of the things I wanted to add here is that developing more standards and specs is important, but that needs to be done in an iterative way that includes all the learnings as we're kind of progressing forward in our journey of understanding GSI better.
Yeah, and I know that was a request that had come up through the LID narratives that we'd presented on last time. Before we go off of this topic, sorry, Sophie, to put you on the spot, but I know you are responsible for maintaining and operating many of our stormwater assets, especially DSI assets. Do you have a few favorites? Like, what's really working?
Well, so it's a little bit hard to say right now, because I look after public assets that have been FAC'd, and we've been going through such a significant period of growth when it comes to our LID inventory that, like, I don't want to speak preemptively on what my favorites are. We have
can't
a
pick
lot
your
of
favorite children.
No. I can't. They're all my babies.
Okay.
We have a lot of bioretention in Calgary, and honestly, like, some of my favorites are some of the non-standard ones, because I think they've just adapted to the environment that they sit in, and we've just kind of rolled with it. Like I mentioned Saddle Lake earlier. I really love that asset, even though it doesn't necessarily meet some of our targets for LID, like a 24-hour surface drawdown. It is trending more wetland, but I don't think that's a failure. I don't think that's a negative, because it does create really productive habitat, and it's so interestingly positioned, because you go through this really densely developed area, very concrete, very high buildings, and then you walk into this park and it's just like silence and red-winged blackbirds. It's like a really, really cool experience. I will give a bit of a woo-woo answer to this, because this is who I am as well. When I think about green infrastructure and LIDs, our whole goal with this is to return to a more natural hydrologic regime, right? So I think it's really important to pay attention to the land that has been here before, and take a lot of the lessons that nature is trying to tell us. So, Alberta traditionally, historically, a lot of ephemeral wetlands, a lot of really small prairie pothole wetlands positioned around the city. And I do think that is somewhat reflected in bioretention as well. I recognize bioretention is not possible everywhere. You know, we're doing a lot of soil cell installations downtown simply because we do not have the surface area, and we're really struggling for land availability for a lot of our different assets. So soil cells are better suited to that. But yeah, anything that's vegetated and is really going to give you that high ET rate, I think that's where we should go for Alberta, just looking at what was here in the land previously.
So context.
Yes.
Brian,
Yeah.
I have to add something to this, because Sophie is not looking at all of the different LID assets, right?
That's
It's just
correct.
like we've got our Parks Water Management,
Certainly.
who is looking after the facilities where we're using, say, stormwater for irrigation of green space and such. And the feedback that we typically get from them is fairly good, in fact. And in fact, with the upcoming industry bulletin on the use of stormwater, things are going to be made easier in the sense that you don't need to provide supplemental type of treatment, which is a huge cost saving to everybody, both from a capital perspective as well as from an operational perspective. And then, of course, there's a slew of, say, landscape-based approaches that are not necessarily within the public right-of-way. The rain gardens type of thing, although Sophie will be looking after some of the more community type of rain gardens. There is the green roof type of thing, rainwater harvesting type of thing. Personally, I think we should actually look at green roofs quite carefully as something that should be of interest, because with our very intense hailstorms that we see in our area, a conventional roof, most of the time, it's toast with that hailstorm. With a green roof, it has been demonstrated, yes, your vegetation will be flat, but it will be back next year, that type of thing. And so there are actually some things that when you're looking at things from a life cycle perspective, there may actually be some benefits associated with that we actually have not paid enough attention to.
Fascinating. All right, I'm going to draw some of our attention back to the Q&A. I can see that a few folks have added a few more questions, and so I invite you to upvote those because I'm just going from the top of the list. So if you want that question answered, please grab your friends and get them to upvote it. So the next question, I think I'm going to summarize because it looks like there's a couple questions in here at once. Okay, so maybe I'll just read the question and then we can all sort of read it together. To what extent has LID been framed as a stormwater solution versus a city building or environmental tool? I think maybe this is like getting back to those co-benefits that I was talking about that we're trying to evaluate through the TBL tool. So how is the variable purpose, the why of LID? So are we doing this because of water quality, because of volume control, because it's providing amenity, climate resilience? How has that variable purpose of LID in Calgary impacted how we're framing LID as either a stormwater solution versus a city building or environmental tool? And if I got that wrong, anonymous, send me a DM. That's big, so go ahead, anyone.
I can jump in on this one first, but I might send this one back to you, Briar, again, pointing toward the TBL work that you have been doing. I would say we've always known and understood that GSI and stormwater more generally, and I would say in comparison to other two water utilities, wastewater and potable water distribution and treatment, is very much about city building, has a really strong impact on the character of a community, on the experience of Calgarians who are experiencing their community, because really stormwater involves every surface in the watershed. So importantly, the gray infrastructure, the green infrastructure that we're building both have a super strong, connection to city building and many outcomes. We've become, and we're trying to get better at actually quantifying those co-benefits: carbon sequestration, urban, heat island effect abatement through vegetation shielding, water quality improvement, water quantity management, even quantifying, the quantity management aspects of GSI and LID type approaches. So I'd say we've become increasingly conscious of the benefit of being able to quantify, not just talk about and sort of hand wave over. And I liked what Sophie said earlier, like her comment about the experience in a community. That's important, but being able to ascribe some kind of an economic benefit to it is very powerful when we're communicating with counselors, when we're communicating with others, when we're trying to set, budget and other priorities certainly within the city of Calgary as a municipal context. So I'd say we've become increasingly aware, but increasingly aware that we need to do a more precise job of talking about the co-benefits, the multiple benefits, the city building benefits that come along with GSI, not only the, if you will, hard water quantity and water quality and watershed management benefits that come out of many of the installations that we're trying to talk to. And again, I'm going to flip it back to Briar because she has been the project manager and kind of one of the most important minds involved in our attempt to build a calculator that does this a little more replicably, so that it is done in a more standardized way, recognizing what we said earlier. Every successful GSI that I know of has been really fit for purpose. And so it's difficult to build a calculator that is going to capture the nuances of each individual, because some co-benefits that might exist for one GSI or one setting, right? A rain garden in a community center area might offer really different benefits from a GSI that's in an industrial area, for instance. And so understanding that, we're trying to build a standardized tool, but we recognize it's got to be a little bit stretchy and flexible too, because GSI itself is quite variable, stretchy, and flexible.
Yeah, context. Yeah, there's that one takeaway. Yeah, that's mine anyway. Yeah. I think that we're not the first people to build it. No, I know that we're not the first group to build a TBL tool to evaluate the co-benefits of green stormwater infrastructure. I also know that we're not the first group of organization to talk about the benefits that green stormwater infrastructure has from a city building perspective. So with those two pieces in mind, the reason we're doing this is not because we're the first ones to invent it or the first ones to talk about it, but because we're trying to allow ourselves the opportunity to take a look at from a comparative perspective about maximizing our investment in a very direct comparative way. So rather than saying we're doing this is because it's a good idea, we're going to say we're doing this because of a good idea, and here is where we think it fits in this context because of the way that we valued these things. And then we've gone to the extent of providing a cost benefit. So it's less about it's about creating more nuance between binary, yes, this fits, or no, this doesn't, and more about acknowledging that because context is important and there are many unique scenarios in which we could find an application for green stormwater infrastructure. And I'll even call back, if you remember my slide, to those pieces of green infrastructure that we're anticipating to evaluate this. When I say green infrastructure, I'm not just meaning a bioswale, roadside bioswale. I am meaning the diversity of tools that we have in our toolkit for achieving stormwater objectives. It's about identifying those places where that piece of infrastructure makes most sense and how we potentially could optimize the installation. So is it a question of roadside bioretention at every intersection, or could we achieve better benefits by putting it at 50% of the intersections? Could we evaluate the opportunity to incorporate play spaces in a dry pond? Or do we maximize other benefits by installing a wet pond with different environmental benefits, et cetera? So once you get down to the nitty gritty of some of these decisions, you are often weighing good idea versus good benefit versus good benefit, and it's in those details that we're trying to identify where the biggest opportunities are for us to install these pieces of infrastructure, and play around with the sensitivity that we have around some of those co-benefits, and also give us the ability to talk to some of our municipal partners for whom those co-benefits are their main benefit. So it's partially about communication, it's partially about finding the right space and the right size for the location of these, and getting into the details around we say optimization, but it's really about making hard decisions about two good ideas when we've got two of them together.
Strategy explicitly called to the role of stormwater management in city building. It absolutely it emphasized that as to a part to think about. I think LID in Calgary, in many ways, it has been seen in the context of the runoff volume control in, say, Nose Creek. That's what everybody is getting caught up on as to, oh my God, we need to do things associated with that. What does that mean? And there's a huge discussion going on about that as to what are we looking for that. I think there's already moved or been significant movement over the last 15 years on that. But it's coming back to the fundamental questions as to what are we as a society, what are we valuing? In the case of a Nose Creek or our other smaller creeks, we're all saying, and the development industry says that too, we don't want it to be an urban storm sewer. But what are we looking for it to be? And there's a recognition there that even bioengineering has limits as to what can be done with that. And so it's a lot of discussion as to, okay, what are we hoping to accomplish? I think a key aspect, and I think we pointed to it to a certain extent in our 23 strategy as well, you can't look at land purely from a single purpose perspective anymore. You have to look at multiple perspectives. That doesn't mean that I'm going to get every square inch of open space and green space, because the programming needs of our community still come into play as well. And so it's that balancing as to what we're doing. But Maggie, I'm just, because you're involved heavily with our growth planning in the city, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I was going to add on, I do think it's fundamentally a part of our city building. I think effective and efficient stormwater servicing is important and fundamental to us continuing our city building in both a greenfield and established area context. And to me, like you guys have all talked about, LID fits into that based on the right context. And so I think the more we talk about it as a fundamental part of city building, the earlier we start planning for that. I think our past failures have been kind of plugging it in as an afterthought, or kind of honing and focusing in on failed installations and applying that kind of as a blanket. So I really enjoyed a lot of the context today around context really matters and making sure that this is the right fit for our climate and our situations. But I very much feel that it is fundamental to city building. And I think the one thing we can take away from the Bears Paw failure is everything underground and everything that takes away the stormwater quietly is really fundamental to what customers expect. And even though they don't think of it as stormwater, or they don't call out LID as important to them, they are expecting that these services are there and that they're functional.
Thank you, Maggie. Let's move on to, we've got a tie up here. So let's go to, do you have any examples where smaller localized rain gardens on individual lots have an impact on areas with known flood risk?
We do not have that, strictly speaking, in Calgary because we haven't implemented it to that extent. So what we have is, at the moment, it's theoretical in that way. I think Lita is ready to jump in because she may have some examples in other areas.
Yeah, I just thought I would throw in a couple of things where, like Bert said, especially in Calgary, it hasn't been done, well, really hasn't been done at scale anywhere yet. But we've certainly done some demonstration projects on sites where they had a localized flood issue on their site, and we were able, like, water was going into a parking lot at municipal administrative building, and we were able to make that flow go into a rain garden, and the parking lot got its parking spaces back. We have 2 cases like that. We have another case of infill in Edmonton where in the spring a neighbor's yard always flooded, and with regrading and doing the rain garden, those flows, and this is, of course, they've got sump pumps running a lot of the time anyhow, so the basement seepage question is top of mind as well. We seem to have fully resolved that. So at that micro scale, we've seen wins. On the larger scale, of course, that would still be at the modeling calculation level, but I think it's very hopeful.
And Briar, again, don't just look at rain gardens in isolation. Look at it together with other things as to, it's like when you're dealing with flooding, you need storage. So the whole thing is, how do you provide storage? And Ted's project is addressing that to a large extent. My personal impression is that, say, properly sized rain barrels, that's not just the little rinky-dinky things that you see at most properties, but the larger ones are actually potentially quite beneficial in that. And so this is a part we're looking at quite carefully. And this, like, there are products becoming commercially available for that, where in fact some quite significant storage can be provided, and then it will come back again cumulatively, right? So this is like one solve it for a community. This is like having it together for a number of them. Then it can start making a difference as a function as how much storage you can provide.
Context, or like study area also being important. I'm going to go to our next question here. Somewhat specific but interesting. I've been seeing a lot of interest in the potential for the use of biochar in stormwater management, particularly as a soil amendment in bioretention areas, increasing the porosity, conductivity, and water holding capacity. Has the city looked at the use of biochar in LIDs?
May I start with this one, Briar, and then I'm sure others may have some comments.
Yeah.
One of the novel technologies that we have been looking at are potential biofilters, and they might be biofilters that use a variety of different media, including but not limited to biochar. So we have some work ongoing right now to kind of look at that opportunity. We know we talked about our inner city areas where there's, they weren't developed with ponds and with the types of BMPs that are normal in development now. So we do see some retrofit possibility to this kind of a concept that is developing biofilters. Biochars may be important either as additives or as components of the media that might be part of filter systems that we could add, again, adding to our, to our toolbox. And, we talked about chloride earlier. There may be some potential for biochar to assist even with the removal of chlorides. But again, I think this is still fairly nascent for us. It's something that we're looking at, the right amendments, the right types of filters, the right types of treatment train thinking, I guess, in the design of various GSI or other water quality amendments or improvements.
Yes, we are a very curious bunch.
Right.
Yeah.
Just comment on that, Briar?
Yes, for sure.
Yeah, so the thing about biochar is it's typically used to improve nitrogen or phosphorus availability, and more so nitrogen. And because nitrogen isn't really high on our list of chemical parameters to control, it is not high on our list of things to include because it's also extremely expensive. And I don't know if Anton wants to get ready to be promoted from the floor if he's still around, but he might have something to say, particularly on the biofilter thing, which is like a whole other world.
Mhm.
But the biochar in particular, there is in the upcoming CSA bioretention and rain garden design and construction standard looking to be out this fall that we do have some verbiage in there on biochar. The thing about biochar is it's extremely specific what you engineer it for to deal with. And so it's mostly wood chips will cover for what it will do, and those are usually free. Arborist chips will cover a lot of what biochar does for us. Completely different in an agricultural setting where you might want to, you're really looking to see that your inputs of fertilizer are being not leached away, and for your plant maximization, your yields, which are not goals in our systems. And so the calculus is a bit different, but lots and lots of people looking at it. So far, nothing to see that's compelling. Lots of salesmen at the door, but with products, but it's very expensive. So I don't know if Anton was around there. I'll see if I can go find him.
Well, I was going to suggest we've only got sort of 3 minutes left here, 2 minutes left. And then I think we're going to go back to the networking mode. So I know we've got a bunch more questions that we can't get to yet. So what I'd like to suggest is that if you are specifically interested in like a question that you would like answered from some of our panelists, we'll hang out a little bit more. I can see there's a few questions about source water. I can see there's a few questions about integrated delivery. I can see there's a few more questions in here. So what I want to do is I'll ask one more question from the group, and then we will do some networking, and then more conversation can happen at tables, if that is all right with everyone. So one last question that is currently upvoted. Yeah, okay. With the gradual but steady growth in the continuously monitored and controlled approach to managing releases from stormwater detention facilities, are there any initiatives on considering the move from static controls to dynamic control of stormwater infrastructure?
I'm willing to jump in on this one, Briar.
Mhm.
Yes, so recently the City of Calgary's done quite a bit of work on low energy release methods, and they're really aimed at trying to better match up the stormwater response we're getting with the morphologic realities of, again, particularly our smaller creeks and streams, Nose Creek, West Nose Creek, Pine Creek, smaller systems that are much more, if you will, tipsy in terms of their response to increased water quantity and the timing of that. And this idea very much links with that. We're also in a place now where we have a network of 40 rain gauges. We have better radar and better weather models than we've had in the past. The concept of being able to manage systems with controlled outlets, particularly on ponds, is something that certainly has been passing through my mind, kind of marrying up these concepts of getting better morphologic response from our streams or into our streams and creeks from our stormwater, as well as managing water quality and other outcomes, including the potential for water water reuse. So you consider it when you build, storm ponds in Calgary, often in the, catchments where we have the more sensitive receiving streams, we're building, 6, 7, 800, 1,000 cubic meters per hectare. We're building relatively large storm ponds. The ability to use that storage capacity, to the best of our ability, to use all 12 cylinders of the wonderful Ferrari motor that we have in these giant capacitance, is to me very important, and that naturally leads to the idea of being able to integrate, real-time control type systems. We're taking steps toward that, I would say, through things like the low energy release concept, which still relies largely on passive outlets, but to get the kind of response that we need to be able to meet a low energy response curve, we do have to start thinking about pond outlets differently. A standard orifice, a single orifice, or a series of orifices in a single control structure probably won't do it. And things like solar pumps and real-time control and actuated gates, they are a reality. And I think for some of our larger facilities, even on things like McCall Lake, these are the kinds of things we've been thinking about. How can we manage the water better for better outcomes for our receiving streams, but also in terms of everything from water quality all the way through to potential for water reuse. And I think technology is advancing at a pace that's going to allow more real-time control. In some jurisdictions, this is a fairly normal thing. In those jurisdictions, water tends to be valued even higher than it is, I would say, in our jurisdiction. So love the question. It's definitely something we're thinking of and stepping toward with things like our low energy release work.
Yeah, and Brian, just to add to that, and Frank already touched on McCall Lake as a project where we're actively looking at this. The future will absolutely have a role for dynamic systems. Absolutely. And in fact, my colleague Dwayne Giesbrecht has been adamant that as part of the update of our 2011 manual, we're starting to put some verbiage in about that. I do want to say, it's something we need to be careful with. Let's just say, many may have heard on approaches like Opti in the eastern United States, and tying it to weather forecast and such. For us in the summer, and we need to look at it more carefully because we've got our summer thunderstorms, which tend to be extremely localized. If you let water go and the storm doesn't materialize, that water is gone. And so how do you play that? And so those types are the kinds of things we carefully need to consider and think about. But absolutely, the future dynamic systems are part of that.
Thank you. With regret, I need to announce that our panel has come to a close. However, this webinar has not yet. So what we're going to do now is we're going to switch it back to the table mode. So just pretend you're in a conference center and we are all standing around a table. I would very much like to invite those people who did not unfortunately get their questions answered by the panel to stick around and come track some of us down. If you on the panel are interested in answering one of those questions, maybe say in the chat and so people can come and find you and we can have a bit of a discussion. This room is going to be open until 12:15. So you're welcome to hang around and keep chatting with colleagues or maybe making a few new friends. And the panel will be in the room to answer a few more questions and continue that discussion. Thank you very much for your participation and attention today. We look forward to connecting with you in person at the conference in November. Please let us know what kind of training eventually you would like us to try to prepare, as well as go ahead and submit a conference abstract. We would love to hear your thoughts and presentations in November. Thanks very much, and we'll see you next time.